Welcome you to Porch Talk. This is your host, Alan, and I'm very excited for today's guest. I've got Jordan Hansen, and man, he has lived quite the life. He has crossed the Atlantic twice. He has pedaled across Australia 13,000 miles on a bike, and he has trekked the Mississippi, and he's been up to some really cool projects. He's a writer, and he's also how I found him was he was doing these boat sessions to where he would record musicians from his boat. So Jordan, man, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Things are going really good. I live in Seattle right now, even though I was born in Mobile, actually.
Oh man.
Uh, but yeah, no, it's like September's my favorite month up here because when it's not smoky, it's just like the perfect temperature. All the tourists have gone away, and it's just like the best time to be up in the Pacific Northwest. So things are great up here.
Right on, man. Well, tell me a little bit about growing up, man. I understand that you named your boat after your father. So tell me a little bit about just growing up and what you were into.
Yeah, so I was born in Mobile, and all my mom's family is still down there. But I only lived in Mobile for like 6 weeks. Then we moved back to where my parents had been living, which was Sligo on the west coast of Ireland. My family had a scale manufacturing company that had been around since 1889, and they had moved to started in Chicago. This family of Danish immigrants, and then my grandfather had brought it over to Ireland in the 1960s because he could get some, they needed manufacturing and he could get some tax breaks, and it was a good business opportunity. So my father went over there as a young man and then continued to keep things going. I was in Ireland for about 18 months. We moved to England, where same kind of stuff continued. Then he died of an asthma attack when I was 3 years
Oh,
old. So I ended up, strangely enough, my grandparents on my dad's side, they ended up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, of all places. Which I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's like,
I haven't.
yeah, it's maybe like 40 miles north of the Mexican border, and it's a great little town. It was a really great place to grow up, and I think that there my grandparents had gone there, started up another scale manufacturing business, and my mom wanted me to know my grandparents since I wasn't going to know my dad. And she would end up meeting a guy there, my dad, who was, incidentally, both my biological dad and my second dad. I never called him my stepdad. They're both named Jim. But 2 years later, she met my new dad, Jim, and they ended up getting married and eventually have a brother. But living in Las Cruces as a kid, I have nothing but like really fond memories of that. And part of that was, we lived in, some just pretty like regular suburbs, but there was a low rock wall in the back, and I could hop that rock wall, and I was instantly in this like what felt like a wild desert. And there were all kinds of
Yeah.
things. There were scorpions, there were bones, there were centipedes, arroyos. Me and my cousins would go out there and we'd build forts and booby traps. And my brother ended up kind of. It's funny because like my mother's a very wonderful, like motherly woman and very protective, but my brother ended up just being kind of blocking for me as a young baby. So she just would let me hop the wall, and I'd go out there with with a bow and arrow and a pocket knife and a hatchet, and just wander off. And it felt like I was going a million miles away. I was probably no more than like a half mile away, but
Right.
it felt pretty distant to me. And it's been interesting over the years, like looking back. I think like no matter what I've done since then, and that's probably like the most adventure I'll ever have. It was just because the comparison of being a little boy out there playing. But anyway, we were there for a few years, moved to Seattle because my dad went to law school, and moved back to Albuquerque. And when I moved up to the Pacific Northwest, we were in a little town called Woodinville, which is not too far inland, but far enough inland that you're not gonna, in your day to day, you're not gonna see the ocean. Um, but we'd go to Seattle on a consistent basis, and our little weekend trips all around the Puget Sound. And even though that I'd been in the desert for the first 11 years of my life, like I just saw all this green and all this blue. And, and just Seattle was like a very, coming from Las Cruces, New Mexico, it was a huge city. I mean, it's a big sized, like, international city. Like, it is big, but it's not like, there's still something, that's kind of very towny about Seattle. But compared to Las Cruces, it was, there was the Space Needle.
Yeah.
Like, to an 11-year-old, that was wild. So I really fell in love with that place. And when we went back to Albuquerque, because my dad got a job, I was totally, I was not into it. So when I decided to go to college, I chose a school up here in Washington, University of Puget Sound, a small little school down in Tacoma, but it was close to the water, and that's where I got involved in rowing for the first time. So I was never, like, I swam in high school, but wasn't particularly athletic. But rowing was like the first sport that I really, it really got me. I just, fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Like, I loved the way it felt. I loved the team. I loved the way it looked. I loved all the equipment. Even it was worth getting up at 4:30, in freshman year of college and throughout college. That was what really defined my time there. Getting up at 4:30 to be down in the boathouse at 5, and getting out there, and it's I mean, you're also not going to bed super early in college either. So
Yeah.
even on that little bit of sleep, it just ends up being so worth it to be out there with a bunch of people working towards the same goal. And then you'd have enough of these just beautiful early mornings, and like Mount Rainier is this, it's about 15,000 feet, which, compared to, the mountains in the Rockies, it's, that's tall, but not like, there's plenty of 14ers and, all along the Rockies. But here, like, Mount Rainier, like, starts at sea level. So, those, when you get to the Rockies, like, you're starting at like 5 to 8,000 feet. So this mountain just dominates the landscape. And early morning when the sun's rising up and that mountain is like pink, it's just it's overwhelmingly beautiful. So I was just totally in love with this sport, and it was, again, the one that I was first one that I felt natural at.
Yeah.
And so good enough after college that I could entertain the idea of training to see if I could get on the Olympics. And I started down that path, but pretty early on, I saw this poster at this boathouse wall in Seattle advertising this rowing race from New York to England, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. I was thinking about kind of what the commitment was going to look like for training to get on the national team, and I love rowing a whole lot, but I also really love to travel. And this seemed like a way to combine those things together. And I was like, I would definitely travel for, if I was in race rowing, but it was like the idea of training for just like a 2 kilometer race, because that's the average race distance.
Mhm.
And to perfect that thing, there's a certain, like, there's a real virtue in doing that. But I just kind of like the unknown and the chaos of this idea of rowing across the ocean, because I had no idea, like, what the hell that was going to look like.
Right.
And there were just so many other factors that were into play, because it's like, well, you got to live and row on the boat, and just being out at sea. That's something that, even being raised in the desert, I was drawn to. And it just seemed like this really, like, well-rounded test. And that's exactly what it ended up being. I asked my friends, and they kept saying yes. These are all these guys that I'd rowed with in college, and they were just, I asked my buddy Greg, who I was training with, and, like, he said no. Then I asked my buddy Brad, and he said maybe. And 10 days later, he turned that into a yes. And so I called up Greg, and I was like, got a team. I could tell you said no, but I kind of felt you were a little bit interested. So, and he was like, yeah, maybe I'll be involved. And I was like, I knew his maybe was a yes. I had a feeling. Then we had our ask our buddy Dylan, who was like, I can think like the most practical of all of us, and I couldn't really believe that he said yes, but he did. And when he was kind of telling me about his process of coming up with that decision, he's like, "Yeah, I told my mom. Said it was the dumbest idea she'd ever heard of."
Now, was Dylan the guy in the video who was responsible for packing the food?
No, no, that was my buddy Brad.
Okay. And I mean, I remember like watching that video, and that was real, like that was gut wrenching. Like, not only like you said to prepare for this journey, day in, day out, fighting the water, but then I mean, you got, like you said, you're living on the water too, and so you've got to be well prepared.
Yeah, no, that's the thing is that when we got to New York, we've been preparing for 18 months. And when we looked at all the other boats, there's no way you could have paid me to get into anyone else's boat. I was really proud of the way that we had prepared. I think the whole team was, and the whole team had a lot of confidence. But there was this great moment, like throughout, we're all, right out of college. So we're really young. And kind of what we brought to the table was like, we really believed in this idea. We knew that there was a lot we didn't know. And when we went and asked people for help, I think they really saw that come together. And so, we ended up finding like a lot of really good mentors along the way. And with that was you'd get a lot of people who would volunteer a lot of advice. And it was one of those things where, the kind of the napkin math that I have when it comes to advice is like, if it's advice you're seeking out, chances are it's going to be good from like 35 to 65% of the time. But if it's volunteered, 5 to 15%.
Yeah.
And on the day that Brad, Dylan, and Greg were packing the food, I was back in the boatyard working on the boat, finishing up some other projects, and we'd been, and like there were days that we were in the boatyard till like 2 a.m. trying to figure. And the thing was, is like it's not like we were working hard, but we weren't working smart because we were just figuring everything out. So a lot of this was like we'd do something, we'd make a mistake, and then we'd have to fix it. I mean, everything was just super slow. But miraculously that day, like I got all my things that were on my punch list done by 5, and I went to this bar, and I was there in time for happy hour. And this is like getting ready to like right just before we're getting ready to go to New York for this trip,
Hmm.
and we're at this neighborhood in Seattle called Ballard, which is this really salty place. And I sit next to the bar, and there's a salty guy who's sitting there, and looking pretty grizzled, and he's just starts asking me what I do, and it's like the last damn thing that I want to talk about at this point is like,
You're right.
but it's like, but the thing is like the thing that I told myself as I was like kind of entering this space of like doing a really big cool thing, I was like, it's a privilege to be able to do this, so that if someone comes out and asks you that, like you really owe it to that person to really give that story. um and at the same time, it's like, well, we didn't really feel we hadn't done it yet. We were gonna do it. But so I was like, just took a deep breath, and I just kind of went into the whole spiel, thinking like, who knows, like maybe this grizzled guy in Seattle's a tech bro millionaire. Who knows? Like
Yeah.
he might be inspired by the story. Um, well, he kind of looks at his drink, and then he looks at all the bottles of booze behind the bar, and then and he like looks back into his drink again and goes, "It's all about how you recover from your first big fuck up." And it was one of those things, this unsolicited advice, and I was like, that is a golden nugget of truth. So
Yeah.
I remember like taking a sip of my gin and tonic, thinking, write that down. That's gonna come back.
Yeah.
And well, there we were on day 16, and Brad's like, "Hey, we didn't bring enough food," and I was like, "Well, the crazy old man in Ballard was right." It's all like, this is the moment, and how we recover from this moment will dictate our success or failure. And it was absolutely right. And that was something that was like, just like a kind of a nugget of truth that I held on to. And, we're doing these things, and like, these are my buddies. And like, Brad had, he had owned up to this. And it was like, asking these questions as we've invested 18 months of our lives into this thing, when in our early 20s, it's the biggest thing we've ever done. And now that there's this one thing that is putting that in danger, and it would be easy to blame it on one person, but it's like, I mean, ultimately, it's a hard thing not to do, but at the same time, you're wrestling with like, well, it's not really the right thing to do either, because like we're a team,
That's it.
and the one thing that we're really good at is that we covered each other's asses, and we always presented this united front. And so while we were out there, we didn't. No one found out that we'd been rationing food and lost 150 pounds between the four of us before we landed. The only people who knew were the film company that we had been filming with and our navigator. But our parents didn't find out about this until we arrived, and we looked just emaciated.
Yeah. Man, I could only imagine it. I mean, I've heard it said, I mean, probably the parallel between a rowing crew, the closest thing that I could draw an analogy to would be a band when it comes to something like that. I mean, you got these four guys putting everything on the line, and you have that one mistake that surely, yeah, one guy is responsible for, but we're a team, so we just got to eat it, and you got to rise above it.
I mean, and it's one of those things. Like that's been like I look back and I'm like I'm so proud of those guys, and just like us as a team being able to do that and rise above. And it took like, I mean, there was some hard things to work through after, but it was something that like everybody on that, on this trip like has a relationship,
Yeah.
which is shared this really special thing together.
Yeah, and that if people want to know about that journey, the book is called Rowing into the Sun, right?
Yep. Yeah, and you can get that on my websites or Amazon, jordanhansen.com. It's on, you can get a paper copy, or you can just download it on Audible. I just turned it into a audiobook myself, or like I did the voice for it this
Yeah.
last year.
Right on, dude. And I couldn't imagine, like, the thing I think about at sea would be those nights where you got bad weather and you can't really the only thing I guess you could see would be the thunder and lightning lighting up the sky, and the waves are rolling, and man, that's got to be I couldn't even imagine that. It would be like it's a nightmare, I guess.
Well, I mean, but it's kind of a beautiful nightmare because it's scary, but it's super humbling. I mean, when you've sit like down in the South, you got all those big thunderstorms that come in,
Yeah.
and out there, and you're so close to so much power. It's just a really like it's a humbling thing to see. The I had this moment on the second trip, where we had this lightning storm come overhead, and it wasn't quite. It was turning dark. It was like just like that half hour, and we saw the antenna start to glow.
Hmm.
And I had a big beard at the time, and I started to feel it move.
Oh yeah, like the you could feel the static or whatever in the air.
And it was just, I mean, it was scary as hell.
Oh, we were uh we were working in Guatemala in a village of just outside of Chimaltenango, and we were so high elevation, Fuego, the active volcano there. We were a little bit above it, so early morning when we were working, you could see down inside the volcano, and you could see the magma. But I remember as we were working, we weren't really paying attention, and it was like a fog to us. And next thing you know, we were working building these 10 houses, and we were in the middle of a thunderstorm, but we were in the cloud. And at that time, I had a big beard, and it was raining, but we were in the cloud, so you didn't really think anything about it because it wasn't falling or hitting you. And then the next thing you know, like you said, I could kind of feel my beard kind of moving, and I looked over at my buddy and I was like, "We need to move." And then next thing you know, right when we took cover, lightning just streaked across, and I was like, we were eye level with it, dude. It was one of the most insane things I'd ever experienced.
I mean, I'm so glad you said that because like it's one of those things where like I've told that story before, and I was like, am I imagining this? Like I could
Uh-oh.
felt it move. But yeah, it's great to get another man with a beard can confirm that.
It's a real thing. Well, dude, like You mentioned the second trip. Would that be from West Africa to Miami?
Yeah. So that one so the first trip was a race. I went from New York to England. We were racing against three other boats from England. One boat quit in the first 2 or 3 days. We made it across. We won. We got a Guinness World Record. Um, and afterwards, I had this moment when we were coming into Falmouth, which was the port we were going to, and there was this moment where you're at sea, you're at sea, you're at sea, and then suddenly, like you're still in the water, but the ocean's behind you. And I remember looking back, and it's like, I'm starving. We have like one bag of polenta and a bag of tuna, and I'm like, if we just had more food in this boat, I'd want to keep rowing. There was just like this still like this desire for whatever reason, and maybe it was just like habit at that point, or like something else. But I wasn't quite done with it. And over the years, I ended up getting another crew of guys that my buddy Greg ended up doing it again. He ended up being the manager for that trip. This guy named Adam and Marcus and Pat. Adam and Marcus Adam was a Canadian gold medalist from Beijing in the men's 8. Marcus is a filmmaker and adventurer. He just finished a non-motorized trip around the world that took him 8 years.
Shout out to that, man. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Routes of Change. Sorry, Roots of Change. Yeah, an incredible story. But anyway, he was part of that crew, and the idea of a race wasn't as exciting to us at this point. But like, because it's such a unique place, and when there's the pressure of the race, it's like, if you're in a rowboat, like you want to row swiftly across the ocean. And I love a race. I love the idea of it. I love doing it. But there was so much out there where when we weren't rowing, it was feeling like we were falling behind. Uh, and there was just so much to see. And I think there's two types of people, or like when I think of this, I describe two types of people. There's people that go out to the ocean and they see nothing, or there's people that go out to the ocean and they see everything. And so
yeah,
both times, lucky to be out there with people who I felt like they also saw everything. And I think the coolest thing about rowing across the ocean is this level of intimacy you have with the ocean. And you look down and it's just a few feet away and you're not going fast. So you can really see the detail really up close. I mean, I've sailed across the ocean since then. And even on a sailboat, you're going just fast enough that it's not quite as intimate as just putting your oar into the water. So we kind of took that idea and it was like, well, how do we translate this to, because we're looking to fundraise. So like, what's the stick? What's our shtick this time? Like, how are we gonna, what are we doing this for? What's our reason? It's like, well, we're gonna try and, we're really curious about this, and we're gonna share that curiosity and use this as an educational device. And so we got involved with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, about half a dozen, more than that, several different organizations and scientists. And so we decided, we're like, there's interesting things that we can learn out here. So like, how can we quantify all that? So we
hmm
did a psychological study. We were collecting temperature, density, dissolved oxygen, dissolved CO2, basically taking the temperature of the ocean with all of these tests, the whole way across. And so, but then we put a really big satellite dome for the size of the boat to be able to communicate that back to students. And so for the first trip, we had created a nonprofit. We called it Or Northwest. And Or Northwest started to evolve into this adventure education company. And so we did that. We did a trip around Vancouver Island to prepare for the second ocean row. And then
yeah.
we did that row. We ended up capsizing. And that's its own story. And I can get into that if you're curious, but just to explain that kind of the timeline, what we learned from that trip was, it's really great I loved rowing across the ocean. I thought it was really, really cool, but it is very hard to translate that, or at least with the technology that we had, to really translate that effectively into the classroom. And me and Greg were thinking about like, well, we love this idea of sharing this adventure. So like, what's a really good adventure where we feel like we can like reach students face to face, like get in the classroom, but still be on an adventure. And the Mississippi River just made sense. I mean, especially, come from, doing it for an American audience because,
Modern day Lewis and Clark.
well, yeah, Lewis and Clark, and there's Mark Twain, and there's just the Mississippi River has layers and layers and layers of significance to any American, and that's true if you trace it back to first people or Mayflower, or if you just got turned into if you just took your citizenship yesterday. Like the Mississippi River has these levels of significance that transcend so many levels of the country. And the coolest part about it is you could go have this crazy adventure and you could like show up and like meet students on the side of the river.
Yeah.
Or the teacher would pick you up and like we pull our boats up on the side of the river and he'd pack us up in a truck or a van or a car and drive us into a classroom. And sometimes it was like we'd wake up on the side of the river, row a few miles, and go talk to a classroom, and then they'd take us to a grocery store real quick, maybe buy us a catfish meal, and then we pop back on the river and row a few more miles. But as we did that, it was like, okay, like we've done these trips, so how do we start to translate that to other people? And that's when we were like, okay, it's been like. Definitely been like it had been a boys club for a long time just because it started from a man's crew team.
Yeah.
But we'd gotten some interest and some interns along the way to help us that were from our same university, but they were women who had rowed there, Rachel and Leah, and they ended up doing a trip down the Columbia River. And that was something what was like ended up being a little bit of a transition trip for us because we were trying to figure out how to make this Mississippi River trip consistent, like something that could happen on a year or bi-yearly basis, and be funded, and each year be bringing new like students who had taken classes in this case at the school I went to, University of Puget Sound, to go do these trips effectively. And so they would learn about the Mississippi, they learn about the science projects that we were doing on the trip, and then they would go out and they would be the ones talking to the students along the way. So that's what Rachel and Leah did on the Columbia River, and then we turned it into a class at the University of Puget Sound, and there were these 8 students that went down the river, and that one we Google Street Viewed the Mississippi River.
Oh, that's cool.
And continue to do these these science projects. And unfortunately, that was the last Or Northwest trip. So we had 5 of these big trips in 10 years. But the funding I couldn't have, we couldn't figure it out. And it just needed to, like, because of that, it was just, I ended up getting burnt out. And at that point it was rough because we just built it up to this, we had a board of directors and we had all this stuff, and then it just like kind of fell apart, and it was pretty heartbreaking for me. But at the same time, it was okay that epoch in my life like came to an end, and and at that time, like I'd started to have some ideas for writing. Like I never really thought of myself as a fiction writer before. Like I'd made that book about the first ocean row, but I'd had this idea for some fiction that like popped up, some historical stuff. History is what I studied in college. So like this adventure romance story had kind of these stories were popping up, and over the years I've written about 1,200 pages of those. So I'm still pretty far away, but gonna get it done. It's got a lot of other things. But while that was happening, I ended up taking like my rowboat and turning it into a little tour here in Seattle. So it's called Rowing Urban Waterways, and I just take folks on a 3-hour tour starting in Lake Union, which is in the middle of Seattle, and row into Union Bay, and we cover about 7 miles, but it's like a history tour meets bird watching, and It's super relaxed, it's super chill. And kind of the reason I bring that up is that kind of leads into tiny boat session. So I'd had this time in like rowing. And then I'd spent all this time, it's like several hundred rows, like entertaining people in the back of the boat. People who had no background with rowing, sometimes no background with boats. And I was entertaining them, making them, have a good time. And when the pandemic happened, it was mid-March, and my my roommate and I decided to go for a row just to like blow off some steam because it's like early March 2020 were some dark times.
Yeah,
And
needed to get out for a minute.
yeah. So we just went out to like the local saltwater boat ramp, which is in that neighborhood of Ballard that I was talking about. So we put in, and it's just like there's some days in March in Seattle that like when it's not raining that are just super beautiful, and it was like one of those days. Like a nice wool sweater is going to keep you perfectly warm, and it was like dry and just like a spectacular sunset. And I'm rowing along, feeling about all this, feeling good about the decision to go rowing that day. And I start hearing music like come across the water.
Yeah.
I turn around, and there's a grizzly man in Ballard in his tiny boat with a saxophone who's just playing like he doesn't give a damn. And to see that at that moment in that space and time, I was just like, I need more of this. Like I absolutely like I don't know how. I just like I'm drawn. Like I got to figure out how to put people in the back of my boat and play music. And it seemed to fit because it was, between where I was in the boat and the people in the back of the boat, there was, easily 8 feet. And it was outside. So it was, a safe way to interact with people that was also really intimate. And so I started asking my friends and, like I had this idea, and then and I had this idea on like maybe like a Thursday, and then that next Friday I lined up all of these people, and I did. And the thing is that all the lining up, I'd reached out to a lot of people over that week, and nothing really started to happen until that Friday morning. And then over the weekend,
Sounds about right.
over the weekend, I got 11 people in the boat who sang 4 songs each. So I was in the water pretty much the whole weekend. And then that Monday, I did the last one, and then that was when the governor signed the stay-at-home order. And so I had these 11 artists, and that I'd known, through the boating community for the most part, a few exceptions here and there. And I had these 4 songs from 4 songs each, so that was 44 songs, and that was the first season of Tiny Boat Session. Yeah. And so started feeding out a song a day, and I'd go for the first artist through the last, and then I'd start their second song, and it just felt like a beautifully defiant way to deal with that moment. It was keeping me busy, and it was, I mean, like I felt with all of these, like, so when you first heard about me when I was posting stuff, so that was in spring 2022,
right?
And I was in the middle of like getting like I ended up getting enough. I ended up shooting 91 artists.
Wow!
In like less than 2 months. So I came back, and then my band got stolen, and there was and I did some travel. So there were all these things that like in terms of me processing all this stuff, it's just taken forever. What I'm getting to is that I've just started delving into it right now, and it's like I watch these things, and there's something so beautiful about seeing these artists in the back of the boat, and it's just something about like the shape of the boat focuses the viewer on the artist, yeah. And the boat bounces the sound back into the microphones really beautifully, and then you have this wonderful aquatic background, and there's such variation in it, and everything is just stripped down to like that moment and the artist and their song. And there's just like a lot of like everybody's extra pretty, everybody's extra handsome. Like these moments just when I'm going through and looking at them, it's because if you're working on a project and you spend a lot of time away from it, and then you're like, was I just fooling myself? like was this a bit of a pipe dream? Was I just kind of caught up in the enthusiasm of the moment? But I go back to these, and this has been consistent since like pretty much the first one. Like I've definitely improved with how I've been able to get the sound and stuff like that. But each of these moments is beautiful. And the thing that I've concluded with a tiny boat session is that it's not about the video, it's about the moment. So like the
Yeah.
moment is a tiny boat session, like, and that happens, and the video or the film is, that's just a that's the souvenir at the end of that. But like, so it, in especially on like this, because I put out 4 seasons. I'm working on number 5, but I have like 8 total. Um, but it was kind of in number 5, and kind of 4 to 5, that I started kind of get my stride with better microphones, and also just had like a better understanding of, how I wanted to capture this, and just realizing that like this really was just that this wasn't about capturing the film at all. It was just about creating this like really beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Uh, and I don't know, man, like there's just out in the world, and in the world of social media, there's a lot of negativity and like snarkiness and unpleasantness, and I just wanted to create something that was, at least for me, like an antidote to that.
I totally agree, man. Like with these interviews or with some of the recordings that I've done with musicians, and I mean that is my exact approach. Is with everything that I see on social media that makes everybody just bicker and fight one another. What if I brought some beauty into the world? Well,
Yeah,
what if I offered up an alternative? Because it doesn't have to be this way.
yeah,
And I mean, you had my buddy Greg Padilla, and then I started digging into what you had done, and then I was like, there is so much more. And I mean, just your track record, just through like what I've seen through your Instagram, was like, yeah, this guy gets it. It's you don't have to be on your soapbox and spewing out these opinions that are going to get people to argue and have strife with one another. When you could bring this incredibly creative artistic endeavor and just offer it up, and you don't really have to say anything. It speaks for itself.
yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like, I mean, there's absolutely. I mean, I think it's important that there's a time and a place for tough decisions, and tough conversations and things like that. Those are all things that are like they're really important, but I feel like for the most part we aren't really doing it well. you
Yeah,
know
totally agree.
these are really important conversations, and they're necessary conversations. A lot of them are a long time coming, and a lot of them we're going to have to keep having.
Yeah,
Like that's I think one of the things that like everything important is kind of will continues to evolve. And so each generation is going to have to, deal with those similar questions in some kind of way. But the one thing that's going to make that, you know, I guess facilitate something more productive is like just being, listening to one another and being like really, I mean, and which is like listening is really hard sometimes. And, it's like, and changing your views. And I don't know. I mean, we could dig into all that.
all right, man. Just to backtrack away from the boat sessions for a second, tell me a little bit about the wild hair you had in Australia.
Yeah. So that was in 2000. That was in early 2008. And so like I came back from that ocean road trip in 2006.
Hmm.
And, there's just a funny thing about like big accomplishments, because you can get depressed afterwards. And like depression, I think is something like I think that's a thing. Even if you've had like a really good weekend, like if you had a great weekend, you feel like you're really disconnected, and then you come back like that next day, and you're like, man, why am I so down? Um, like it's a real bummer.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's like
and
it's like a depression hangover.
yeah, totally. And it's like you're like, well, this thing happened, and it was like, and I think this is just the way humans like process the good, process the bad. You have these big things that go on, and like then we kind of got to like take some time to kind of file them away in our mind and in our heart and our soul, and in our body in some cases. And so like I was pretty like I just was in a funk for that whole I came back in August, and I went from like 210. No, I was like 215. I went from 215 to like 179, and then ballooned up to like 240.
Quite the roller coaster.
Yeah, and so because it was like I came back and I was just eating compulsively after that. Like it was like kind of funny for the first few days, and then it was like I can't stop eating. Like it's like we given ourselves like in a very brief amount of time, and kind of a like an eating disorder. It wasn't like a lasting thing, but it was definitely like the way that our body responded, and it was you had weird because we were so malnourished while we were out there. Like everybody had weird overuse injuries just from trying to working really hard, and so like your body is maintaining what it needs to row, but all of these other things, it's just like, well, don't need that, and you don't have enough food, so that's going to be on the chopping block. And
Yeah, dude, I could only imagine, man. It's like, you're putting in these calories to work and to row and to be able to think and to hold yourself together. And I think it's impressive that y'all maintain the friendships. I mean, I could only imagine, just being at each other's throats, toward the end of that journey. But once again, you did have that homogenous or collective thing that we are in this together. But I mean, there had to be some, there had to be hard times out there.
yeah, no, there was this I mean, one of the most powerful moments for me was because like Greg was a little bit older than everybody, and if going into this project, if he'd been like, oh, like I'm older, and like if he was like showed interest in being team captain, like I absolutely would have said that he should. But just because he was older and he'd had more experience with in the real world doing projects and things like that, and Dylan and Brad had just graduated. I'd been out for a year, and then just Greg's a really competent human being. Like he's like good at everything he puts his hand to, and is just like a really good worker. And we're also like really good workers together, which is like that was kind of my first experience working with someone really intensely after college. And it was one of those things where I realized like that's actually not normal. Like to be able to work on that level with someone where you have the same like likes, dislikes, interests, but you approach problems from different like but complementary ways, and so you can just chew up a bunch of work really fast. And like
Uh,
it doesn't matter what you're doing. I mean, you could be shoveling staples, but if you're doing with someone that makes it feel really fast, I mean, it's like there's a real pleasure to that, and that kind of syncopation. I mean, same kind of going into like another. I'm sure musicians feel the same way. There's got to be some musicians that have a real hard time playing with others, and others where it's like, oh, we could have been playing, our entire lives.
it is exactly that way. And the ones who are hard to work with, I mean, they're typically bedroom musicians. They're very competent and they're ridiculously good to a point to where if they play guitar and you play guitar, they make you want to quit just how good they are. It's like this is unbelievable how good you are. But at the same time, that's also their problem. Is like they don't work well with others. They
Mm,
have it's the ego brain. They have to be the spotlight. And it was like, this is a band, buddy. It's all of us. It's not just one of us. And
totally.
so it's got to be something close to that.
Yeah. So
It,
we had
it, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, that's okay. Yeah. So yeah, we just had this moment out there, and it was towards the end, and it was like, so we're, this is getting like things are getting towards the end, but like finishing is not a guarantee. And I think Greg had like we'd had all this cheese that went moldy, and we had been scraping the cheese. Well, Greg like it scraped the cheese versus cutting the mold off because like we're trying to preserve calories. And so it went down, and then like seconds later, it went up. And here's this, Greg's been, um, he'd also gotten sick. He'd gotten really constipated. So that was like the only time that we didn't row the entire time that like someone got knocked out was, not because of storms or, someone like, got beat up or bruised or anything like that. Just it was constipation.
Hmm.
And so he'd lost a lot of weight. He'd been, and it was just kind of like, and it's, constipation is one of those things. Like if you're in your, a dude in your early 20s, you've never had, much of an experience with that. If you're like reasonably healthy, then, and so it was kind of funny at first. And then like, it was like, holy shit, like this could be a trip killer. I mean, he worked it out. But it was like, it took a toll. And then on top of that, he, is trying to preserve calories, eats, some moldy cheese, he throws up. And then like, a day or I don't remember when it was later, but like Brad had been like checking it up on everybody. Cause I mean, he felt super guilty because it was, he'd taken on the responsibility of the food, and it had not worked out the way that, he did not get the support from us that he should have in hindsight. But I mean, that's me looking at this problem from hindsight. But at the same time, so he was like, and he owned it as, I mean, better than I think a lot of people could. And part of how that manifested was he kind of asked people like, how you doing? How you doing? Like just kind of checking in.
Yeah.
Like checking, seeing what the oil was like.
I mean, I could see just by the video. I mean, he was very distraught by it.
Yeah, totally. And I remember coming in the cabin once, and Greg turns to me, and they're like, we're so fucking close at this point. And he's like, if Brad asks me again, I'm going to tell him how I feel, and I'm not going to hold back. And I was like,
oh gosh,
we're so close. This is like the last thing. We're like once things are said, like they'll never be able to be unsaid. And we're still going to be on this goddamn boat, and we're still not going to be on shore. And like, and here, like Greg's like an older brother to me. And I really, really respect him. And I said, Greg, you can't do that. And he turns to me and he said, like, are you asking me as a friend, or are you ordering me as the captain? And I was like,
both.
yeah, I was like, man, I am asking you as a friend first, but I am ordering you as a captain. And I mean, the fact that because like Greg, we were, in terms of like, I was captain in the fact that I had a tie-breaking vote. But because all these guys were, like I'm sure I had my, my skills, but everyone else here like had a huge amount of skill, a huge amount of experience. There was no one that's, I needed everybody to be a leader on that because I couldn't do it on my own. It's just that, we needed a tie-breaking vote, and we needed kind of someone to kind of provoke discussions. And that was like the first time where it was like, when I think back on that I made a real captainy decision in the sense of like, I was like, Greg, just don't do this. And he didn't, and he held it in. And I know that was really frustrating, and I know it probably hurt. But at the same time, it just didn't seem to be something that we needed to, like that the boat needed at that point. And I mean, in hindsight, it did, we had these video cameras that we were, doing these video diaries. And so that was like a great thing. That ended up being like a mental health thing, because you could go there and you could basically just like, yell into this diary. And sometimes there's an interesting thing about the acoustics of the boat. So when you were in the back cabin, you could hear, like if the window was open, if the hatch was open, you could hear pretty much everything on deck. Like it would all just like focus back there. So you could hear what everybody said, but it wouldn't work the other way around.
Okay.
So every once in a while, like someone would be in there doing a video diary and you could hear like this muffled yelling. It's like, well, get it out of there than in our interactions. And like, and I wasn't above any of this too, because like, probably one of the reasons that I didn't want Greg to blow up on Brad is because I'd blown up on Brad like a few days or weeks earlier. We had when it all first happened, when he was like, yeah, we're gonna talk about the food, and I was like, Greg and Dylan, they're gonna just bite his head off. I was super concerned about that because like Greg and Brad, like they're bizarrely enough, they're like good buddies now. Like they do long distance running together.
Oh, cool.
But I mean, I never would have guessed that they would have built that relationship afterwards. And so, and that took years. And a big part of that was that like when Brad got married, he was like, this 3 guys that I rode across the ocean with are going to be there, and everybody showed up, and it was really cool. But it just, reflects poorly on me. But I had initially was like, okay, like I really got to put myself in Brad's corner because Dylan and Greg are going to want to bite Brad's head off. So I kind of did that, and I got a real long fuse, and very slowly I would like over a period of weeks as things like smoothed down. Brad was, I was getting hungrier and hungrier, and Brad was, he was one morning, he was just feeling very chatty, and he wasn't usually chatty in the morning. And I knew we were both really hungry, and he's kind of going off and he's chit chatting. And I was like, Brad, I just can't talk to you in the morning, man. I just can't do it. And so we're rowing along. It's a good day. And I kind of feel the cadence of the boat pick up. And I'm just thinking, like, is that me? Is that him? And then I was like, Brad, while we're talking, I just said, like, I don't want to talk. While we're at it, everybody on this trip's fucked up. But you fucked up the worst. There's just this silence. And we'd rowed together for years at this point. And so I'm feeling this anger build, and I'm feeling the anger, and he's responding to it. But our rowing is just great. The oars are going into the water, snapping together, we're matching perfectly. And I can feel the boat pick up speed. And this kind of boat, it has a speed that it wants to go. If you go over that, you're just kind of wasting energy.
Okay.
So there's a distance speed that it wants to go, which is kind of, just short, consistent strokes. And these were longer, they were harder, and they were these are totally unsustainable. We were burning energy that we knew we didn't have on the boat. And he said, Jordan, that's not fair. And I said, I know, and I don't care. And I mean, yeah, of course, you got nothing but time to think about what you said after that. And I was like, that was pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
So, and I just kind of realized,
cat's out of the bag now, though.
Well, yeah, and I just realized, how unproductive, for me at least. I mean, anger is not an emotion that I have ever been able to wield with any kind of if just existing in the world and interacting with humans, we're trying to get what we want, impose our will in these ways, and and anger is a way that people use it.
And a lot of people are good at it, and some people don't know how to harness it,
Yeah, I don't know how to harness it. And that didn't make me feel any better. It didn't get me more of what I wanted. And it just made me, as I reflected on that, I was like, here's a goddamn burden that I could set down. I'm choosing to be this way. And a few weeks later, I don't know, might have been days. It's all the days kind of rolled together. But I remember just taking him we were getting ready to get out on a shift, kind of a little bit of a rainy day. And I just was like, look, man, I just got to let you know, no matter how this ends, I forgive you. And I need you to know that before it's guaranteed that we get in. And, after that, I kind of broke down. I started crying, and it's but afterwards, I felt so much better. I was that didn't change my hunger. It didn't change anything. And it's and I would go on to continue to be annoyed at the things that Brad would do, because we lived on a boat together. He was annoyed with stuff that I was doing.
Right.
But there was a lack of a burden there that was really productive. Just I realized that was something that I was holding on to. And it's just being angry at someone, there's that whatever that phrase is, it's taking poison and hoping the other person's going to get sick. And that's not the way that works. Well, yeah. At least for me.
Tell me while we're there, the capsize, weren't y'all 3/4 of the way?
So the capsize was on the second trip, and we were, things were going great. We had, we turned it in, the boat was this we had so many things we were doing on this boat. We were collecting science samples. We had extra solar panels so that we could communicate and run all this science equipment and do all of these, like, take these like mental health surveys and on and on and on top of like rowing across the ocean and doing and and communicating back to shore. And like things were going great. It was a slow trip. We were kind of where we were going, where we were starting, where we were going. We were fighting a lot more current, and we didn't have as favorable of winds. So we weren't as far as long as we wanted to be, but we still had like a solid, like a 20 days, like solidly of food. So things were good there. And everybody was healthy. Everybody was happy. Like everything was going great. And I woke up this one morning on the 73rd day, and it was, and I could feel us, like we were surfing down waves, but like in a good way. Like this was, I got out on deck. I mean, I could feel the boat, and it was moving the way that the boat likes to move. And I was like, okay, finally, we got some good waves. We got some good wind. Like we're going to make some big time today. And it's like, it's about time. So get out on the deck. These guys have been rowing for 4 hours. And so like, they're tired, but they're feeling excited too. We're kind of checking with the waves. It's like, we've rowed in worse than this before, and that they're going in the right direction. So things are feeling really good. So let's just stay with it. And things are so normal that when these guys get back in they're getting back in the cabin. My buddy Marcus is getting back out. It's so normal that he gets his bucket out to go to the bathroom. It's like, that was what it was. There was nothing so out of line with the weather that it would have changed his decision to do what he did at that time every single day.
Mm-hmm.
So, that starts to happen. And, Pat's kind of doing a little bit of stretching here and there before he gets in the cabin. And as he gets in the cabin, there are these two waves that aren't particularly big. They are, they're definitely not big. But they're square and they're flat, and as opposed to like triangles. And the first wave comes and just overwhelms the back of the boat, and so it kind of rolls, and like it's the crest of the wave is higher than the gunnels, and so it's just like two fire hoses have just opened up right into the boat, and so that presses the boat down into the water and covers up the scuppers where that water eventually like just comes out. And if it was just one wave, it would have been fine. Would have been a little dramatic, but nothing crazy. Then the other thing then the second wave hits, and it's like back to back, and that grabs the boat and surfs it into the back of that first wave.
Oh man.
We corkscrew into the sea, and we capsize, and Pat has been closing this door. This is and he's not able to get it shut. And in order for that boat to be self-righting, both cabins have to be secured. And like this was just in the middle of shift change, so it's not secure. He gets filled up, and so now it's holding the boat upside down. And it's like 10 to 15 seconds is when all this happens. I see Marcus pop up, and then I see Adam, and then I see Pat, and it's like in like less than 30 seconds we've capsized, and I'm hearing everybody's voice. So I know everybody's okay. And so we have these, we have these beacons on our life vests, and so we turn all of them on, and that sends up a signal in order to it sends up the signal in order to be found by the Coast Guard. And then we put out the life raft, and then check in with each other, and like everybody's doing good. Like spirits are high. Like this is not a great situation, but we're feeling like we're gonna go give it hell. And so we get on top of the boat, and we wrap some ropes over it, and we just try and like haul the boat over, and we do that for like 3 hours. At the point where we're all exhausted, we retreat to the life raft, and then we wait it out, and first thing you do when you get in your life raft is you figure out like what's all the equipment that you have that's available. And so, we had a really nice life raft, had a bunch of stuff in it. We still had, we were attached to the boat, so we could go in the boat and like we had access to water and food. And, we were feeling like, we were in a good position considering it was a bad position. So we're just kind of chilling out for a little bit in this uncomfortable, floaty, floaty pool of a life raft.
How long would it take for the Coast Guard to get there?
Well, so yeah, so we'd been capsized for about 3 hours. We tried to flip things over, and we were in the life raft. And one of the things that was in the life raft was it was about this big. It was a book about the size of a postage stamp, and it was called the Little Bible. And so Adam had grown up going to church, but I mean, nobody was really church going at this point. But Marcus pulls this out, and we just think like, oh, it's an adorable little Bible. Like that says, I'm not calling it a little Bible. It has the letters, the Little Bible on it.
Yeah.
And so we're just kind of looking at each other, and we're in this weird, crazy situation, and like, couldn't hurt.
Yeah.
So Marcus starts reading Genesis, and as he gets to the end of it, the Coast Guard starts flying overhead, like at 300 feet above us, maybe less. And these two Canadians start going, USA, USA.
Yes.
They drop all their stuff. They drop a bunch of extra equipment that we end up, they drop this barrel, and it's got a list of 4 things on it. It's got a blanket, it's got water, it's got some food, and it has glow sticks. And so we pull this, Marcus goes and swims with this barrel, and swims it over, and it's like, do we need anything here? It's like it's like a keg-sized barrel. We don't have room for it in the life raft. And it's like, it's currently watertight, and maybe we might need those things, but like, we don't need them right now. So we just assume that what's in it is what's on the list. So tied up to the bow of the boat, this orange barrel, painted safety orange. Marcus comes back, and then they drop another one a few hours later because they had the plane switched out. And this one has in grease crayon all over it, open me. But it also has a much more whereas the other one had a list of 4 things, this one had a list of like 20 things, including a VHF radio. So it turns out that first one had a VHF radio. And I mean, why this was a big deal is because, they weren't able to tell how many people were in the life raft. So Greg was back on shore, and he is the conduit between, the Coast Guard performing the rescue, and then all of the families, including, Adam's pregnant wife.
Oh no.
I mean, it's just like it's really dramatic, and it was a hard. It made it harder for Greg than it needed to be. But I mean, the logic made sense at the time. But anyway, once we talked to him, they're like, "Hey, we're going to divert this ship. It's coming your way. We're going to, so we just kind of had to sit there and wait. And, we're just trying to stay hydrated. We got some food, so we're eating a little bit of food, but you're not really hungry. And you're like, it's kind of.
Yeah, adrenaline has got to be pumping, man.
Oh, totally. And listening to that aircraft fly overhead. At first, it was an HC-144 Ocean Sentry, and then it was a C-130. And it was like, as long as we heard that, like, everything felt okay. And we felt like we were found. And that was like one of the most profound things about getting rescued by the Coast Guard, which, I mean, God bless those guys and everything they do. It was just to hear that hum of that engine was an incredibly powerful thing. And so we're on the VHF radio, and we're chit-chatting with them. It's funny because you can tell, like, these guys are all about our age too, and they've, they're doing a completely different kind of adventure, but now our adventures have intersected, and they just kind of sound like all guys, like, you can kind of tell, like, they kind of want to joke, but they got to be professional.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh man, I'd love to grab some beers with these guys. So anyway, they tell us that this ship, they diverted the ship to go pick us up. And in the afternoon, turning into evening, the ship that shows up is a roll-on, roll-off car carrier. So it looks like a skyscraper on its side. and it is absolutely massive. This thing is just unbelievable. It's 580 feet long, 100 feet tall, just a huge beast of a thing. And it's like it's us and it's them, and in the distance there's this Russian freighter, and so like, and it's like the most things that have been around us in months. So we talked to the captain, and he's like, "Time to cut loose from the boat." So I look at the boat. I'm thinking this is the last time I'm going to see it. I cut it loose, and we start floating towards this giant car carrier, and it just starts getting closer and closer, and the waves are gray, and it's like the wind's at like 30 knots, and we can see all these guys dressed in orange with like their white hard hats and their life vests, and they're all clutching these ropes. And right around the side of the boat, like the water's turned turquoise because the bow thrusters are churning up all of this water, and we hit that backwash from the bow thrusters, and it just throws us down the side of the ship, and all these ropes are getting thrown to us, and can't, and we don't catch a single one. And so it's getting dark, and they have to set up for another pass. So we end up doing that, and then finally we catch this the pilot ladder, and we end up climbing 45 feet from these 6-foot waves up into this car carrier. And I mean, we're all in our underwear, and because we've been in this life raft for for about 12 hours, and it's I mean, it was hot and sweaty in there.
I bet.
Yeah, like at the moment you grab onto that that rope ladder, it's like it was there was no way you could like pull my hands away from that. Like it just like there was such intensity to each handhold after handhold all the way up. And then the ship was Japanese, the officers were Bangladeshi, and the crew was from the Philippines. And these Filipino crew guys, like, they wrap us in blankets and they give us a hug, and they're like, you're okay now, you're okay.
Yeah.
And they take us up, they give us soup, and then one of the guys comes down, he's like, "Who's in charge?" And Marcus points to me, and so I got like long blonde hair, I got a huge blonde beard, and everything is just like bleached by the sun for so many days. And let's see, on someone's voicemail. Sorry about that. Yeah. So let's see, where was I? So
who's in charge?
Yeah, who's in charge? And so I come up there, and like I'm in my underwear and got this big old hair, big beard, and everybody else is in these nice uniforms with these epaulets on the side. And there's this moment when I walk in, and everybody looks at me, and I'm looking at them, and it's like, just picked up Robinson Crusoe. And the guy, like, he hands me the radio, and I get on, and these guys on the Coast Guard, they're like, "Just wanted to check they made it on board the ship." It's like, "Yeah, man, thanks for saving us. Thanks for looking out for us." But it was one of those things where it's like, God, I wanted to say something profound. I was like, "Thanks, buddy."
Yeah. Nothing more to add, nothing more to subtract. That's all I got right now.
Yeah, and I mean, it was like, like Superman, dropping us off, being like, "Just doing my job, citizen."
Yeah. Carry on.
Carry on. Yeah.
But the boat was recovered, and
yeah, so
it's okay.
Yeah. Well, so that was a whole other adventure, and actually, like the final chapter with this whole thing's been written in the last like few months. So, and that's part of the reason that like slowed down Tiny Boat Session. But we ended up getting the boat back, and so we landed 2 days later. We spent 48 hours with a wonderful crew of the Haijin, watching Bollywood movies, and they gave us these orange jumpsuits, and so we looked like we had escaped from an insane asylum. We didn't have any shoes. There were no shoes that fit us.
Oh man.
And we ended up getting washed up on the shores of San Juan in Puerto Rico, and just had an incredible time with these Puerto Ricans who came out to give us a hand. And so anyway, we we arrived on a Sunday and like at 11 o'clock, and Greg, like, we hug all the family, and then Greg kind of emerges from the shadows, and he's just looking cool as a cucumber. He's been like, shit's been crazy for 3 days for this guy, and you wouldn't have been able to read it on him at all. He was like in his element. He was totally in the zone. He's like, "You guys ready for some work tomorrow?" Like, we go check in with the Coast Guard. We do an interview. We debrief with them. We head down to we go to sleep at like 2 a.m. We wake up 4 hours later, and we get picked up and we get taken to the studio, and then we're talking to the Today Show. And then we spend that whole day. We had computers and cell phones out. There was like, half dozen computers, a dozen cell phones. Everything's ringing. Everybody's communicating. We're in the lobby of this hotel, and it's like, we're gonna tell this story. We're gonna tell our story. We're not gonna let anybody else do it. And so between us and our families, we were fielding all of this stuff, and I mean, it was crazy because it was all happening in a hotel lobby, and there's like, we're getting energy from pizza and beer, and it was like one of the most exciting days of the entire experience. And like, and at this point, like, this experience had involved, when we arrived in Senegal, we ended up waiting. We thought we were going to wait for 2 weeks before our boat showed up. We ended up waiting for 55 days. And
Oh,
so
wow.
Senegal for 55 days was its own incredible adventure. I mean, that whole thing could be a book. And here we are, we rode across the ocean, we capsized. Now we're telling our story. And then Tuesday rolls around, and the CEO of the Canadian Wildlife Federation showed up. He was our sponsor, and he was this guy who is Wade Lundsey, God rest his soul. He championed us, and was the reason we were, him and his buddy Randy, who also worked for the CWF. These guys had like made this sponsorship happen, and they really, really believed in us with all their heart. And so now this thing that was terrible, but it could have been way more terrible, happens. And then we're kind of in this weird position, like, well, what about the boat? And I mean, I've been thinking about this kind of stuff for a long time, and I was like, man, like, I read a lot about shit like this, and it's like, everybody's asking this question, what about the boat? What about the boat? And then Wade asks it, who's the person who's got like the most, who can make the biggest difference with this. And I was like, it had been kind of going through my head, this phrase. I was like, if we don't look for it, we're not going to find it. But if we look for it, we're probably not going to find it either. And that's the
Yeah.
reality. And then Wade says, go for it. And it just unlocked the next 10 days, which were like the most cowboy 10 days of my life.
Okay.
I had no idea how the hell I was going to do this. Like, I'd spent Tuesday kind of researching like how we were going to get an airplane, and how and then what we were going to do when we found it, if we found it, what was possible. And so the Coast Guard had, it was no extra effort on their part to keep running this algorithm to get a drift pattern that could give us like a search area to work in. So, I mean, that was just like something that they just plug in some numbers and they give it to us. But then we end up talking to this guy named Raul, and he was like, amigo, we're going to find the boat. And he was this pilot. And, so we ended up going
I
up.
like his style already.
Oh, yeah, totally, totally. So he, this is that all this stuff is happening. Like, so Tuesday we figured out, like, Wade takes us to dinner Tuesday night. So this is just, it's crazy, like, how quickly this is happening. We land at 11 p.m. on Monday. We flip on Saturday. We're in San Juan, Puerto Rico at 11 p.m. on Sunday. And we do all this stuff on Monday. Wade shows up on Tuesday, takes us to dinner, and we end up talking with, it was the next day. Yeah, it definitely, it was that next day, because we went out, like, it took Wednesday to set it all up. And then Tuesday we go out flying. And I was just thinking to myself, like, this is like, I just have to keep going until I hit a wall. And I don't know what that wall's gonna be, but it's like we just have to throw everything we can are able to at it. And it's like as long as like things are happening, then that's kind of the path. So if Wade said yes, it's like okay, like he's serious about that. So if we can find this airplane, we're gonna get on this airplane, we're gonna go and we're gonna look for it. But there was a part of me in the back of my head, I was like, this is a fool's errand. But I was like, if we go out there, we're gonna have 90 minutes to look for this airplane. And if that 90 minutes is up and we haven't seen it, then that's it. Like that's we have given our A+ effort. We've really pushed it. We drop down to 800 feet and we're going back and forth. And I hear Greg and our photographer Aaron talking about whether or not they've seen something. And I turn around and I was like, guys, it's our airplane for the day. Like, if you think you saw something, tell Raul and he'll tell the captain to turn around. They do, and the airplane ends up having to bank the other direction, and that ends up being a good thing because the wing just goes down and does like a Vanna White, and there's our boat.
Oh man.
So like now we've seen the boat, and it's like I mean it's so ecstatic. I mean they're incredibly emotional. We just can't believe that this has happened. But as it kind of settles down, it's like, well, what the hell do we do next? It's like, okay, by the time we land, we we're by the time we land, we end up uh there's like some other guys had been like the other guys like Pat and Marcus, they'd been reaching out to people trying to find like some boats, and there was some crazy boating people that were like, yeah, I got like a 30-foot boat, I'll go out there and like tow your boat back. It's like that's not going to happen. Well, what turned out is that Pat had gone to school at the same place and rode with us at University of Puget Sound, and his roommate from freshman year was the son of a guy who was running Foss Tugboat Company, which
Oh
is a
wow.
tugboat up here in Seattle, and they had a connection down to a place called Berenken Towing down in San Juan, and so they ended up getting us half price per day to go look for this thing. So that's what we did, but it was like $10,000 a day, and the
Ooh.
Canadian was like, I mean, he stood by us the entire time. We had enough for about 10 days, not 10 days, like 7 days to go out there. So like 2 days to get there and back, and then 3 days in the search area. And it was like, well, we knew where it was, but like the whole thing, like the boat's just it's gonna keep moving the whole time. It's out there in the water, like, wind and the waves are moving this thing around, and it's like it's a 30-foot boat. It's a needle in a haystack, and we've basically, we found it once in like from the sky, and that's like finding a car parked in a parking lot the size of Rhode Island. And so now we were, like the next level. It's like, Seattle's in a place called King County. So it's like now this place is the size of
Mm-hmm.
King, 20 by 20. And I mean, this is a very, very tiny thing we're looking for. And so we get on this 110-foot tugboat called Ocean Century or Century. And it is crewed by guys that if they were in different clothes and on a different boat, it was like the Pirates of the Caribbean, but they were friendly.
Yeah.
um, they the captain was this Muslim dude from Honduras named Israel, which I just felt like was an incredible name for a captain on a tugboat in the Caribbean. So it's going to be like, it's like 2 days for us to get out. We're traveling, like this place we're going is 375 miles away, and it's going to be like 2 days of travel. So, we get there at like 8 in the morning, and we get familiar with the tugboat. And then, everybody's so sleep deprived that we like fall asleep. But I mean, the tug doesn't leave until, noon or 1 in the afternoon because, like they got to go up and bunker fuel, and like putting that much fuel on the boat like takes hours. And I mean, that's why it's going to cost so damn much.
Right.
So we go out there and we, these guys are great. They think we're absolutely nuts. They're like, we're going for what, a rowboat? It's just, it sounds ridiculous, and it was ridiculous. So we get out there, Marcus and I are kind of going through this plan in our head of what we're going to do, because the captain's like, look, when you get out there, you can use all of our tools, do whatever you need, but like none of my guys are getting in the water. It's like, okay, fair enough. Um, so we're just trying to, I've never done anything like this before. Neither has
It,
Marcus. We're just
I
gonna be
mean,
shooting from
the whole story is something that like you probably never experienced, right? Capsizing and waiting on the Coast Guard and getting an
Oh yeah.
airplane to find it, and
Well, yeah, and now we've doubled down. I mean, that's the thing that really got me is like when I was thinking about this, it's like, okay, like Poseidon slapped us down, and we're gonna go back and we're gonna ask for the boat back. Like, what's wrong with us?
just
But like,
asking for trouble.
yeah, like the energy is going that way, and it's like, man, like it's just we're gonna ride this wave until it ends and just see where it happens. So we got 3 days in the search zone. So day one, like by this time we've managed to convince the crew that like this is not a fool's errand. So like day one, everybody's excited. It's like we're kind of getting in our rhythm. Like we get into the search zone, like people are up right when the sun rises, and Marcus and I are taking shifts to like kind of keep our eyes fresh because it's super bright out there. And then by the end of the day, it's like I'm not even going to bother with that. We're just going to we're just going to stay out there all whole damn day.
And just as
Uh,
far as gear, like the Canadian that was doing a lot of the funding, who really backed y'all, was there a lot of equipment and things that he wanted to recover? Not to mention the ship itself.
well, so he had the boat, and then we had like $40,000 to $50,000 worth of science equipment on board a boat, and then we had all of the footage and all of
Yeah,
this science and all the science data that we had collected, and it was like all this stuff was, if we could find it, it was there. Like
yeah.
it'd be something that we'd still be able to use. Um, so first day, we convinced the crew that this is this is something that might actually happen, and we're cruising back and forth. But at the end of the day, I'm thinking to myself, like, this is just a fool's errand again. And I was like, call up Greg on the satellite phone. I was like, look, man, like we have like the only way we can walk away from this is with 100% commitment, and that looks like sending up the airplane again, because we're out here and it's just beyond the horizon because we can't see it. And what's the point? Like we got to have these eyes in the sky just to know and be able to walk away from this knowing this. Um, so the next day, I know the airplane's going to go up. I know when they're going to get picked up. I know when they're going to reach the airport. I know when they're going to, when that airplane's going to take off. I know how long it is to get out there. And I'm just thinking to myself that it's going to be, we'll see it in the distance. We'll see this airplane over the horizon, and we'll hear it, and it'll like find something just over the horizon, and then it'll do a few loops, and it'll come back to us and wave its wings, and then lead us in that direction. Don't see a damn thing that whole day. It's
Oh
like
no.
5 o'clock comes, and like the energy of the boat has just completely left. And then 5:30, this guy named Jorge, he's in these coveralls, and he climbs to the top of the bridge. He's like, dude with a beard, they found your boat. It's
Oh
20
man.
miles. Like, holy shit. So I mean, the low turns into this high, but it's still like, man, until we have eyes on. And it's like, the boat the tugboat could conceivably be there in 2 hours. But like, we also don't want to run into it, even though that's not very likely. But it's like they just go at like 2 knots throughout the evening, like really slowly, and make our way there. And when we wake up, like the morning of the third day, everybody's eyes are out. Like the people that are up, who've been up on the night shift, like they stay up, and everybody's looking. So there's just this energy is building on the boat, and I'm scanning with scanning with my eyes, scanning with the glass, and I see Israel like come out. He'd been looking at the radar, as I see Aaron raise her hand and start to say something, and then they both start looking in the right. They start pointing in the same direction, and they point at me. And so Israel had seen it through the radar, and Aaron's got some eagle eyes, and she saw it on the horizon. And I bring up the binoculars, and there's this tiny little boat
Hmm.
floating in the distance. And if if you, I have that link on my website somewhere, which is like like that. It's kind of uncut footage, but it's like of what happened then. It opens with that moment, and then you see what happens next, which was we had to figure out how to get this boat somehow on the tugboat. So we go over there, and I'm just amazed that like as we get closer, it's just phenomenal that we even saw it. It's such a needle in a haystack. So we're trying to figure out how to get this thing on board the boat. And Marcus and I hop in the water, and they have a crane, and it lets out the line into the water. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to wrap up the boat, and then the crane will pull it, and it'll flip it over.
Mm-hmm.
It goes too slow, so it's just pulling the boat in. So upside down. There's not enough like force to pull it over.
It's
So
kind of the same experience that y'all had, right? When y'all were on the lifeboat trying to flip it over, right?
yeah, totally. So what they do instead is let out all the line, and then that tugboat with its 6,000 horsepower just guns it while we're holding on to the dagger board, so as a counterweight.
Oh
So it's
man.
all the way over and back upside down the first time. We have to reset it, which is a huge pain in the ass. Like we got these ropes that we've tied up to pull this thing over, and it took like a lot to get this thing, to wrap it up, even with just like one loop, so it'll undo itself. So they do it again, and we go in the water again, and we're managed to like Marcus. I hold the boat. It's really like capricious at that point. He pops on board. He opens up the doors, and we get a lot of the water out. We start pumping out the water, and the boat starts getting more and more stable. And then we pick it up and bring it on the boat. But in that moment of picking it up, I mean, we had great weather too, but I mean, it's still moving back and forth. And so there's like a boat moving with a crane on it, and you have another boat, and we got lines on either end of this. But it's like, it's tough to try. And no one had done something like this before. So it slams against the boat, slams against the gunwale of the tugboat. And then it's swinging all over the deck. And I remember just yelling at people, it's like, it's not worth anybody getting killed. And as I'm yelling that out, I run towards the stern of the boat, and I just grab on, and it's just enough to like slow down its momentum, just enough that other people can get hands on, and we lower it down on the boat, onto the deck of the tugboat, and we got our boat back. And
Cool.
so all of the footage had been sitting in what was digital footage, and so it was sitting in the salt water for 10 days, and so we moved it into fresh water. And Marcus and his brother Chris took it back to Toronto, and they were able to pull off like 30 plus hours of
Awesome.
footage. Yeah, which was incredible, which is why it ended up getting on Dateline. And because it got on Dateline and got all that PR stuff, the Canadian Wildlife Federation was able to make back what they put into it. So that happened. And then we got a bunch of the science stuff back. I got the boat back. And so after that, the boat was pretty beat up. It had taken a few real significant hits. And so where it had been in the meantime, in between these trips, had been at the Foss Seaport Waterway Museum down in Tacoma, which is where, our old school was. And it was down there for about 10 years. And it was the sort of thing where, like, Or Northwest went off and did some different adventures, different kinds of boats. And it's like an ocean rowboat is really like a specific type of boat. And after 10 years and Or Northwest like coming to an end, it was kind of the boat had lost its purpose. It was no longer inside the museum because like they'd gone through a bunch of changes and kind of changed their priorities. And like people who had been really involved with the boat at the museum, this lovely woman named Erla, she ended up dying. And then just like different management came in and wasn't as familiar with the story. And didn't really know what to do with this really large thing. So it was sitting outside, and I was just about to re-engage when COVID happened. I ended up doing a few presentations through Zoom with this lady, Julia, who runs their education program. But it was while I was down in New Orleans before I was doing Tiny Boat Session. their director reached out and he's like, look, man, there's a guy sleeping in the boat. It's like, we just can't keep it here anymore. And I was like, look, I'm not here right now. And he's like, don't worry about it. Just, if you can, when you get back, I really appreciate it. So what the hell are we going to do with this?
Got to give
So
it a proper send off, right?
exactly. So that's where this was leading to is the boat funeral. So we came back. Well, I came back, and I've been talking to Greg about this, and we had some of the people that helped us with the boat, creating the sliding seats, Gig Harbor Boat Works. They lived in not too far away, so I called them up. They had a bunch of property, and I could keep the boat there for a year. But the idea we had was like we have to we got to do, people were like, well, you got to get rid of the boat. Like, are you going to have a Viking funeral? And like, are you going to sink it? And it's like, you can't do that with fiberglass. Like, fiberglass is like, you can't grow a reef on fiberglass. It's just, like toxic garbage at the bottom of the sea where it goes. Like, there's plenty of boats that go down there by accident, but like, we've been trying to do this in like real big adventures in a real responsible way this whole time. Like, that was the plan. Like, that was our goal and our vibe with all this stuff. And can't burn it because it's fiberglass. Like, have you ever seen like a fiberglass boat fire? It's
It's
horrific.
horrible. It's horrible, dude.
Yeah, it's so
It's
bad. Like,
you
black
don't,
smoke.
but you might think it's cool, but dude, I have seen it. Like fiberglass burning is not anything you want to remotely be around.
No, no, not at all.
Smells awful, and it never looks as cool as you think it's going to look.
Oh yeah, it looks horrific. It's a horrible. It is not a pretty fire.
Mm-mm.
And on top of that, it's toxic. So that wasn't going to happen. So we're trying to figure out like, okay, like what is going to happen here? And so kind of come across this idea, well, like there's it's just going to probably just end up in the dump. But like before it goes to the dump, like we got to do something. Like, we got to figure out so we decided we're going to have a boat funeral. There's this race. There's this race called the Race to Alaska, and they also have this the race that precedes it called the 7048. So the boat is down in Tacoma. The 7048 leaves from Tacoma. It's a human-powered race, 70 miles in 48 hours. Ends up in Port Townsend, Washington. There's a day break where there's a party called the Ruckus, and then the next day
I think I saw some footage of that.
Oh, totally, yeah. So there's this party. And the next day, then there's the Race to Alaska, which is a 750-mile race to Alaska, non-motorized. And it's been this thing that's been developed for, I don't know, almost 10 years now. And it's like like-minded people. People want to go out and they want to use human power, out on the salt water to go out and have like a real awesome experience. And we're like, well, maybe her last mission should be a beer run.
I
A beer
like
run
it.
for the Ruckus. Like, we'll have this beer run, and we'll bring the beer for the Ruckus, and we will serve it to like-minded people. And so we ended up, called up the people that were doing the Race to Alaska in the 7048, and they thought it was a good idea. And so that's really, honestly, that's why I haven't been able to, I didn't like why Tiny Boat Session, like season 5 is so far behind, is because like this boat funeral thing came up and it had to be done, and it had to be done well. And it was a huge amount of work. And it was one of these things where like, I hated every moment of it, but I loved it at the same time. There were all of these things like putting together a project and putting together a row and something that's just absolutely ridiculous that I realized like over the years, like kind of put together these set of skills that, I hadn't really flexed in a little while. I flexed them a little bit with Tiny Boat Session, but Tiny Boat Session is like
Real
me
leisure.
and one or two other people, doing like, coordinating an afternoon together. And it's like, that ends up being a whole lot if you coordinate like 91 in 8 weeks. But this was like, there were going to be maybe 100 people at this boat funeral. And then we were going to row this boat with the logistics of getting the boat up here with the beer and keeping it cold. I brought a cannon into the mix because I was like, I'm going to start this Race to Alaska cannon. And so it was this sort of thing where, and then as I'm planning this thing, I'm reaching out to the boat yards, and I'm thinking, like this is the easy part. I just need to like book some time in the boat yard, and we can sit there and we can cut it up. So I call up the boat yards, and they're like, yeah, I'm sorry, like the only people we do this with is with the Department of Natural Resources because they have this boat recycling program. And so I was thinking, oh God, I got to be like a part of this program. And it was like this Hail Mary. I called them up and I was like, look, this is the deal. Like, I know you guys recycle these boats. Like, I really want to do it in Port Townsend so that all of these logistics will line up, and it'll like, I'm making a cool event. And this wonderful woman named Tammy reached out, and she was just a sweetheart. And she was
Made
like,
it happen.
we're totally on board. And like, and the best part was is that it didn't end up in a landfill. All of it ended up getting recycled.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, they're figuring out how to recycle fiberglass these days. And, it's like, it's in early days, but it's like, it's better than it just like filling up a landfill. And I
Or
mean, like
bottom
you're in a,
bottom of the sea or on
yeah, I
fire.
mean, you're on the water, you're in a boating place. You've seen how many like derelict boats there are out there. Like
Yeah.
it's sad.
Yeah.
So
And dude, not to mention it was kind of emotional and like didn't even like know you like I know you now, but like seeing you and your boys just ripping off pieces of it, memorabilia, and I was like, oh my gosh, man, this is amazing.
no, yeah, no, I mean that's the thing. It was like it was unbelievable. It was one of these things where you put together an event, and it's kind of like it's a little bit like casting a spell. If that doesn't sound like a little bit too cheesy, but like you get the right people and the right tools in the right place,
Hmm.
and then kind of what happens afterwards is magical. And because that was the thing, is like I was, I had some help from my buddy Greg, but it was like he was busy with his work, and this was like, this is really the main thing that I was working on for several months. So it was, I'm sending out these emails consistently and just trying to get people on board, and just because it's like planning a big thing and getting a bunch of people to show up, and it's like I'm asking people to show up for a funeral for a boat, and that's ridiculous. But it was this project that had wrapped all of these really wonderful people together, and people responded to that. And so they like there were these moments where I finally knew it was going to happen, like when the boat was ready the week before, we got the beer and the beer was on ice. And then every single day that we rode up, it was like the first place we rode, my buddy Rick, who did the Vancouver Island trip with us, we stayed at his family friend's place and then at his parents' place. And before we stopped at his family friend's place, because we told him we'd show up at 3, we got there, we had great tide and we had good wind. And so we showed up like a little bit earlier, and we went to this little, there's a little town called Manchester. It's got a dock. So we stopped in and grabbed a drink. And I mean, the boat looks very unique. And there were this father son that were at the bar. And so they start talking to us, and we're getting ready to leave. And this young guy, he looks like the son. He looks at me and Greg, and he's like, "Thank you for doing this." And it was like, he got it. Like he got this whole
Yeah.
thing. And so it was like the boat, it makes its way up there. Like we deliver the beer. It's absolutely ridiculous. Uh, the all of these emotional notes are getting hit along the way, and it's like leading towards this crescendo, and all of these like kind of beautiful things are happening. It has this like the boat was at the ruckus and serving beer, and it was like for a moment it got to relive all that glory, and just like be this thing that was bringing all these good people together, doing a fun, like ridiculous big thing. And then the next morning, I was up at like 3:45 because the race starts, at dawn, and I got to get this cannon ready. So I shoot this cannon off, and then, everything starts to come together. Like the boat's getting put in the water. All these other and I had these just incredible friends show up with their boats, and so that we could have this flotilla. Then we had bagpipers. So like,
Proper send off,
oh,
man.
yeah, bagpipers like hit.
Spared no expense on this. I love it.
No, because it was like again, like I couldn't, like this it'd been too much for me. It'd been too much for too many other people, and everybody was here, and like this had to be this incredible moment. So like I got these bagpipers, and I just remember, I finished this interview with the news people, and then you just hear the bagpipes, and like again, just like overwhelming emotion. Just realizing like, am I going to even be able to row? Um, and it was as beautiful as I had imagined. And then get to the we get to the boatyard, and I think, and so like one of the things that was like both like a little bit frustrating, but also like really beautiful was, I'm working with a DNR, I'm working with the guy that runs the boatyard, and like we're having like a last minute meeting. It's like these people are busy. This is like low priority on their list, and it's
Mhm.
like, God, I would have loved to have had this meeting like weeks before to like really hammer out all the details, because I've been keeping them on the thing, on the email, and I was like, I just didn't know. Like, I was like, this is exactly how I want to have this happen. But it was, if the boatyard guy or the DNR could have been like, no, we don't want it to work that way. They were like, yep, this seems like you got it reasonably in hand. And this boatyard guy, who was he's this great big old grizzly dude. And I was telling him about this like months before as we're planning this. And he's like, I don't get emotionally connected with boats. And I was
Yeah.
like, man, that's a good thing in your job, because if you were emotionally connected with the boats and you worked at a boatyard,
A lot of hardship.
that'd be hard. Yeah. So, no pun intended.
Yeah.
So anyway, like we show up, and he's just sitting in the back, and like, well, I'll get to that later. Just like kind of, he was just a solid guy. But we pull the boat out, and it's like there's way more people than I thought than we're going to be there, than I thought were there at the beginning of it. Like probably twice as many people showed up in the boatyard, and we pull it up, and just all of these people who'd been involved with the trip in one way or the other just fall upon the boat. And there was this boat, I mean, there's times that it had just been one person working in the boatyard trying to get this thing done, but with all these hands it just gets pulled apart. Like, this is happening, and like the bagpipers have been playing, they step off, and I got an Irish band to play. So this lovely Irish band called Cross Current starts playing A Parting Glass. And so this is all like, we got music while this boat's getting torn to pieces. It's an interviewer came up to me just as my mom gives me this tearful hug. I just start weeping, and he's asking me these questions.
Like, dude,
And
I
I'm giving
can't
him
right now.
one word answers, because I'm like looking at the boat, and I'm like, I want to save this, or I want to like, make sure this is coming off in some organized fashion. And like, my I'm seeing these guys that I've known for almost 2 decades at this point, and I'm seeing people cry, like sob, like I've never seen cry before. And so it was bizarre. I mean, it
And
was
this
bizarre.
thing is so wild because you were coming out of college and you just saw this thing, this flyer in Seattle that was talking about this race across the Atlantic, and now you're here 20 years later. It's like,
Yeah,
and how many people were connected to you through this vessel? I mean, this is
yeah,
incredible.
yeah. And so I mean, everything comes off, and then she's like this naked boat. The only thing that she's got a bunch of holes in her. We've taken out all the hatches, so it could like easily get crushed up. And I'd done like the step on the boat, and I got like, there'd been a few like things that I had been collecting over the few weeks, to just try and like, that I knew would be these good moments. And one had been, I had this flag, that, this American flag that was on the boat, when it capsized, and then we found it. And when my brother had come back from Iraq, he's a Marine. He'd given me a flag that was on one of his missions. And so like I called him up there, and I gave him my brother. So like the other part about this is like, so the boat's named after my biological father, the James Robert Hanssen. But my other dad, Jim Wood, is there with my brother, who like, we might have genetically different dads, but we're 100% brothers. My mom's there, and I got this big cutout, this big picture of my biological dad. It's a great picture. I'll send it to you. And he's like, he's got a beer. And
Perfect.
so I could call my brother up, and I give him this flag, and I was like, this flag was lost at sea. And I'm just like, you gave me a flag, I'm giving you a flag. And as I was thinking about this thing, like I was just so like I was imagining this moment before it happened, and like taking the riggers off the boat, and it like suddenly like it's like taking its legs. It's got no way to go. Um, and so like that made me really sad. And so like I've gotten into one of my hobbies has been every once in a while I'll carve up a paddle, and there's a few of those on my website.
Yeah, I was really into that and the how to throw a tomahawk. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm into self bows. I'll make bows out of hickory or osage. And
nice.
so like I'm really into woodwork. And so like when I saw those articles, they really caught my eye. And I was like, dude, I was like common interest. Like we both really enjoy working with wood.
Yeah, no, that bow's something I've thought like I'd really like to try and make one of those someday. Um, but yeah, so we were I got carved one of these paddles, and the reason I got into carving paddles over oars is like carving a paddle is something you can do in a day. You can like complete one in a day, and so
Mhm.
like sometimes you gotta work with wood. You gotta like kind of have that meditation, right? But I'd gotten inspired by it because there's like all the tribes up here, they're under the kind of the umbrella of the Coast Salish people.
Mhm.
Um, and so they have this annual and these people got around on canoes for as long as they've been out here for all of the thousands or tens and thousands of years, and these beautiful canoes. And so in the last few years they've started doing these canoe journeys where it's like several months long, and they started one tribal place, and they just work their way along the coast visiting each other and kind of a celebration of culture. And one day Greg and I got invited to go out and do one of these where they needed paddlers, and so had this incredible experience where we got invited into this place where non-natives don't usually get invited, and got to participate in this, and it was super moving and overwhelming. And one of the things that the boat captain had said, he was like, like all the old timers, they carve their paddles. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna do that. So I started carving these paddles, and so this is one of the first ones that I carved, and I was just so kind of like heartbroken at taking the boat's legs, that I brought this paddle along with us, and then I got like my brother and all the guys that had rowed the boat to put hands on that paddle and break it on the bow, and then we threw that in there so she'd have like something to take her into the afterlife.
Right on.
So then it's like, so she's on a trailer, and it's like just didn't seem right to pull to drive her to her last moment. And so I think this kind of surprised everybody, because even Greg was like, "Are you serious? We're going to do this?" I was like, "We're putting the last quarter mile." And so we had all these people. We had, Dave, who built the sliding seats, two of my coaches, and one of the guys that I lived with while we were doing this whole project and I rode with in college. They had all the oars, and my brother and my father were holding this picture of my father, and then all these hands got on the boat. I was arm in arm with my mom. The band's playing, and we're walking through this boatyard, and the boatyard manager, he's driving ahead of us, making sure everything's clear. Um, and like this boatyard is an incredible, it's like a big commercial boatyard. It's an everything boatyard. So there's places where you're going through where it's like you're in a canyon of boats,
Oh
like
boy.
huge vehicles. It is incredible. And we're going along, and this guy who had come out from the university to do a story, he was talking to me afterwards. His name's Chuck, and we did an interview afterwards because it was crazy while we were doing it. And he was like, as we were going along, I saw workers stop and take off their hats.
Oh man.
Yeah,
I salute. Man, that's great.
yeah. So we're coming along, and we're on asphalt on this boat trailer, and it's going, um, and then it hits this gravel. And there was this moment where I looked at the boat, and I saw like there was this moment where like I wasn't sure, are people pulling the boat and pushing the boat, or is the boat like suddenly like going itself? And it was like later I was checking with Brad because he was pushing the boat, and he's like, He said, the weekend was great, man. Like, I loved it. It was incredible. It's like, it was great to row the boat again, but I didn't feel like I was on the ocean until that moment.
Oh man.
And he was like, like I saw the surge, like where that front wheel on the trailer, like where it stopped, and then he said it was like a wave, and like we saw that same thing. We kind of felt the same thing. So we brought it in, and it was going to get chewed up by a backhoe. So we bring it in, and the last thing I do is that we had this water sample that one of our scientists, Dr. Starr, had saved that ended up not getting processed. And so we could anoint the boat with water we had collected in the middle of the ocean.
Why not?
Yeah. And, everybody got behind a gate, and then we watched this thing get torn apart as the band played.
Perfect, dude.
Yeah, it was, yeah, I mean, it was, I hated planning it so much, but if I had not put that much into it, I mean, I'd regret it with all of my heart.
And it truly sounds like, I mean, the people who were there, and I mean, just going back to the bar to the guy's son, it seemed like everyone completely understood and was like, they were in that moment with you. They knew what it meant, you know?
Yeah. Oh,
It's
it was cool.
wild, dude.
Yeah, it really got me.
Man, I have thoroughly enjoyed the story of the rowboat and your story. Man, I appreciate you opening up and sharing all that. Man, I had been on the edge of my seat, and then with this most recent portion, man, I was a little emotional. Man, it was
I hear you.
quite the tale, dude. So I just wanted to bring everything up to today of what you've been working on. You have the tiny boat sessions. I'd like to reopen that can, but also with your writing and what you've been up to. I know you write for magazines, different articles, and I would just like to plug your website. How can people connect with what you're doing, and how people can get behind you? But like, just for starters, is what are you up to currently?
Yeah, so the two things that I'm on right now is so I'm getting ready to leave on a tall ship. So it's a brig or brigantine, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on. But it's a tall ship. It's like a pirate ship, and it's leaving from the Netherlands to the Caribbean and back again. So I'll spend the better part of 6 months on this trip, and this has been the cool thing about this is that this ship is a Dutch company called Fair Transport, and their whole shtick is to move stuff without engines. And so they actually have like a brand of rum, a brand of chocolate, and a brand of coffee called Tres Hombres, which is the name of the ship. And their ship does
Cool.
not have a in it, and they sail it from the Netherlands to the Caribbean and back, and they load it all up with this stuff. So I'm going to be on there as like kind of like a guest slash crew. They take up to 5 people on board, and everybody works on the boat because like a boat like that, just like you can't really be a passenger.
Right.
But the thing is, like, they have a professional crew, but this is the closest I can get to what it would be like to be on a 19th century trading ship and before. And the era that I'm writing is between the late 1800s, early 1900s, where there was a big overlap with ships like this. And I want to be able to build that experience, add that authenticity into my writing.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I was about to ask. I was like, man, this is going to take your writing to the next level, you know?
well, yeah, that's something that I feel like there's so many aspects of it. It's like being on a boat with a bunch of people that I don't know, crossing the Atlantic again. And I really wanted to be on this boat for a whole journey. So like, going back to where we began and not just like going across the ocean once. And I think that's just, it's just like, that's again, something that I want to do. Cause like, man, I've wanted to do something like this since I was a kid. Before I knew about ocean rowing, it turned out like ocean rowing was going to take me across the ocean. But like, I've always been so curious about what it's like to be on a ship like that, and see how it really functions. And so I was, there's a local tall ship called Lady Washington, and I was just spent 2 weeks on that learning the ropes. And there's a whole heap of them out there. And I mean, yeah, it's it's like a bow like that. It's just it's incredible how much human power it takes to really wrangle those sales and make it happen. It's incredible. Um, so yeah, looking forward to that. But meanwhile, I'm actually uh, at the school that I graduated from, University of Puget Sound. I'm going to hire an intern, maybe two, to feed out tiny boat sessions. So I've been working on getting things like I want to make sure they have like everything needs to be edited is edited. Like everything's in a space where someone who doesn't know much about it is able to feed them out on a consistent basis. Because
And
I really wanted. I just like, because that boat funeral, like that really pushed things behind. And I've been lucky that I've had a lot of projects that I can spend a lot of time towards, but at the same time, like, for the most part, kind of a one-man band type of thing. But I just don't want these things to have to wait until I get back to start feeding out. Because like there's been a lot of people who've come out and done who've reached out to me that I would love to do some more tiny boat sessions with, but I feel like I owe it to all of the artists that came beforehand to get them out first and at least have a system set up. So messing around with a website, messing around with like that's just a heap of stuff.
yeah,
It's slow, but it's also been really good to revisit all of these little moments and just be like just delighted, seeing.
absolutely. And where can people find this?
Yeah, so tinyboatsession.com. But where it's going to be fed out consistently is Instagram, and there's Tiny Boat Session on Instagram, Tiny Boat Session on Facebook. And since I'm hiring these younger students, hopefully one of them can figure out TikTok.
Yeah, there you go.
Because I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know how to make that work.
Nor do I, and I'm not going to try.
Yeah. So but I was so touched by these things that they make me feel good, and I think they have the potential to make other people feel good, and I just want to put that out there.
And I think you're on to something. From the ones that I've seen, I was like, this is something special. This was something worth doing, and I'm glad that you shared a little bit about where the idea came from. But I was like, man, thank God you pursued it. It was so worth doing, and it's great. You know,
I really get that because it's one of those things where like put a lot of time towards it, and so for it, but it's like but I've gotten a lot out of it. And
hmm
it's like that thing, like whenever I was like, oh man, this is a lot of work, I'd have to just have a conversation with myself. Like, am I getting what I'm looking for out of it? And that answer like has been yes, and a resounding yes as it's continued to go. It's a lot of work. And now it's, meeting the people and setting up the tiny boat sessions. Like that's the fun stuff, but like the feeding it out, like that's the boring part.
yeah, that's the work.
That's the work. That's the work. And so, I'm going away for a long time, but I just don't feel like I can, I don't want it to wait any longer. Cause I really want those, like in November, first week in November, I want to be setting this up so that like two can come out every week. Just to be able to share that. Cause yeah, these, musicians came out and, they shared their talent with me, and I shared this space that they could play, and it was a beautiful thing. And, hopefully it'll help them, reach some more people, and people will find them through Tiny Boat Session.
There you go.
And yeah, they just
I
make
mean,
me smile.
it's the same kind of project I set up, especially like during COVID. I had this podcast going a couple of years before that, but uh, when everything shut down, it lended itself to where I could meet people who I would not have been able to meet because they would have been on the road and so busy. And
Yeah.
it turned into a Porch Talk record. And
Mhm.
I've already got the second record prepared. I just don't have the funding for it. And so I'm very excited. I mean, it's that very same thing. It's this pandemic hit and it completely altered the state of the world. And I just took full advantage of it. I was like, what can we do?
Yeah.
That
Well, it's, I mean, there's so much of, when you're in a position where you suddenly like in a moment of constraint, like that can be a moment where you just kind of retreat, or it can be a moment where you're like, okay, well, like what can I do? And you realize like we live in if you live here in the States, there's a lot that most people can do. There are a
Hmm.
lot of options for a lot of people. Not everybody, everybody's got a different backstory, but there's a lot of people with a lot of options. And if there are constraints like that, it's an opportunity for creativity.
Absolutely. So, man, just to plug you, your writing, just to go back to your website, is everything that you do, is it available there at your website?
Yeah, yeah. If you go to jordanhansen.com and you go to Tiny Boat Session, you can see I got I think most of my writing is up there except for the book. That's something that you can folks wanna buy. And then, well, here's one thing I say is like, it's great to have reviews. So like if you read my book, great. I love it. A review would be amazing. But if you don't review me, review another author you like. Just
Yeah,
like that really helps authors. It really helps
yeah,
people with podcasts. Like,
yeah,
you putting it out there like that is, that is something that people who create stuff who like if reviews help, like they really appreciate that.
yeah. Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
that's one thing I push on my thing all the time is, man, like just take a little time because it helps. It really does.
yeah.
It just someone else's opinion. They might see it and it's like, oh man, I kind of resonate with that opinion. I think I'll give it a shot.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So you never know who you're going to reach. But yeah, like all my creative stuff is up there and it's pretty much up to date. I did some recent updates. I'm in the middle of updating Tiny Boat Session. So like it's under construction, but folks can go there and see a bunch of stuff. Tiny Boat Session's on YouTube. Um, you know, uh, yeah. So it's like some new, like stuff is coming up. And then as I kind of figure out this whole intern thing, we'll see how that goes.
Well, right on. Well, Jordan, of anything else to add or subtract, anything that we missed that you'd like to cover?
Man, no, I think that's pretty much it. Just yeah, I think that covers it.
Well, brother, when you get back from being out at sea once again, dude, you are more than welcome to come back on the porch, and I'd love to hear from you again, man. I have thoroughly enjoyed this.
I'd love to do that. Maybe we can figure out how to do it actually on the porch.
There you go. Do it. Get off this virtual porch and get on a real one.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Well, dude, I don't have anything else here to do. I'll plug everything in the descriptions. Once again, man, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Alan.
All right, buddy.